If extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, then before we can talk about what is extraordinary, we must first agree on its definition. One approach to determining its definition is to focus on what is considered ordinary. Let's say to be ordinary is to be simple. Therefore, to be extraordinary is to introduce complexity. Does the existence of something introduce complexity, especially unnecessary complexity? If so, then we can assume the existence of such a thing to be extraordinary. Going back to the God example, does its existence simplify matters or does it introduce complexity? And does removing God from the picture simplify matters or does it introduce complexity? For the sake of discussion, let us consider three possibilities: theism, pantheism, and atheism. In the case of theism, does the notion of a God introduce complexity or does it simplify everything? If the universe and its observable laws can be attributed to one thing, this necessarily simplifies everything. One could argue that to be supernatural is to be extraordinary. Supernatural is that which supersedes nature. Does superseding nature introduce complexity? No, since it is necessary for God to be supernatural in order to be offered as the simplest solution. To remove any supernatural nature from God is to introduce complexity, often in the form of an infinite regression. This fact is made clearer by both pantheism and atheism. By affirming God's supernatural nature, you admit that God is the simplest solution. To argue that extraordinary and supernatural are interchangeable terms is to ignore that supernatural is a simplification. In the case of pantheism, does the universe being God simplify matters or does it introduce complexity? The pantheist argument goes something like this. Only life can produce life. We are alive. We are made up of matter. Therefore, matter is alive. Therefore, the universe is alive. The universe we call God. The argument is logical, but we're not interested in whether or not it is true. Does this simplify everything or does it introduce complexity? We know matter decays over time. We know that in their own way, most forms of life eventually come to some kind of end. In other words, the God of pantheism decays over time, eventually leading to its own end. This introduces complexity by challenging the first premise as to what is the true author of life. It'd be a different situation if the universe were eternal. Finally, in the case of atheism, does the removal of God simplify everything or does it introduce complexity? From what we have learned so far, we can only conclude that it introduces complexity. In the case of theism, the universe and its observable laws are attributed to God. By removing God, you are forced to fill in all the gaps that have now been left wide open. This necessarily introduces complexity, making atheism to be extraordinary. Indeed, the rhetoric, God of the gaps, merely affirms that God is the simplest solution. One might argue that atheism is a lack of belief towards a God or gods. Therefore, atheism makes no claim because a lack of belief is not itself a claim. Nice try, but to assert that about atheism is to make a claim about atheism, to which we can apply the same standard. Does that simplify everything, or does it introduce complexity? Indeed, what does it even mean to lack a belief in a god or gods? Technically speaking, I myself lack a belief in certain gods. Does that make me an atheist? To say that it does is to introduce complexity, where you would have completely removed any and all distinction. In what way do we simplify this? You could claim, it just means that you're not convinced by any God claim. But that isn't atheism. That's merely skepticism. How can you assume authority over something that isn't exclusive to atheism? If you say you go one God further than me, then you admit that the definition for atheism is insufficient to describe atheism. So you have yet to simplify anything. You continue to maintain complexity. What shall we say then? In the best case, you're asserting skepticism. In the worst case, you're being a coward. And in all cases, you affirm that the definition for atheism is insufficient. You didn't simplify anything, and you deliberately maintain complexity. At this point, the probability of atheism meaning something or having any value is 0%. Why then do you find need to identify as anything? Surely the decision is intentional. And if intentional, then to claim that you lack a belief towards the existence of a God is to be intentionally deceitful. A person lives out their lives according to their beliefs. If atheism is to be seen as nothing, why do you walk around as if it means something? The only way to simplify the definition of atheism is to claim that atheism is the belief in the inexistence of any and all gods. Of course, this only simplifies the definition for atheism. It does not simplify atheism as a whole. For to remove God from the picture is to complicate everything. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and atheism is the greatest extraordinary claim.